There will be some people who might question whether you're the right person to lead this project and its efforts to end homelessness. How would you respond to that?
Nobody inside Buckingham Palace saw it coming. Prince William waited, watched, and then did something so calculated and so final that Camilla reportedly could not speak when she heard about it. He pulled back the curtain on an inheritance that had been hidden inside the royal family for years, and the name attached to it was the last name anyone in Camilla's circle expected. Lady Louise Windsor now holds something that cannot be taken back. Something shifted inside the British royal family recently, and the people who study this institution for a living say the tremors are still being felt. Prince William, the man who will one day be king, made a move so deliberate and so public that it could not be misread by anyone around him. He removed Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot, from the Duchy of Cornwall payroll after nearly 20 years of employment as the chief interior designer. It was not a small administrative change. It was a declaration. The Duchy of Cornwall annual accounts confirmed what the palace had refused to say out loud. Annabel Elliot received £0 in the most recent financial year, ending a professional relationship that had sat at the heart of Camilla's inner circle since long before she ever became queen. Now, here is where Lady Louise Windsor enters the story in a way that nobody had publicly connected before. While William was systematically dismantling Camilla's extended network within his sphere, he was simultaneously sending a different kind of signal to the rest of the family about which royals he trusted and which direction he intended to move the monarchy. Royal editor Richard Eden of the Daily Mail reported that William had begun recognizing genuine value in his cousins, specifically Lady Louise Windsor and her brother James, and was weighing whether they might eventually step into enhanced roles within the institution. Journalist Chris Riches wrote that Louise was potentially the one person who could save the royal family's reputation, but that she would be, in his own words, mad to become a working royal right now, because she currently has everything. But William's growing acknowledgement of Louise, placed alongside his dismantling of Camilla's connections, created something that neither side had fully prepared for. It created a direct collision between two completely opposite visions of what the crown should stand for. Camilla built her entire position through decades of calculated public endurance. Louise built hers by quietly refusing to want any of it at all. And William, it appears, has finally decided which of those two approaches the monarchy of the future will reflect. What Camilla and her family did not fully account for was that the inheritance at the center of this storm had roots stretching back to one of the most terrifying nights in the history of the Windsor family, a night that nearly ended before Lady Louise Windsor ever drew a single breath. On the 8th of November 2003, a royal birth became a catastrophic medical emergency that came within minutes of killing two people at once. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, arrived at Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey, showing signs of serious distress. Within hours, doctors discovered she had suffered an acute placental abruption. The placenta had torn away from the womb, cutting off oxygen to the baby and causing Sophie to hemorrhage so severely that she lost 9 pints of blood. Emergency surgeon Marcus Setchell performed an immediate cesarean section in a desperate attempt to save both lives. What made the night even more unbearable was a failure that should never have happened. Surrey police received the emergency call and did not dispatch an ambulance for 30 minutes because officers mistakenly believed one had already been sent. By the time help arrived, Sophie was approximately 15 minutes from death, according to accounts reported across multiple credible outlets. The police later issued a formal public apology, but no apology could undo the terror of that night. Prince Edward was on an official visit to Mauritius when the crisis began. He flew home immediately to find his wife recovering from major surgery and his daughter, born 4 weeks premature and weighing just 4 pounds and 9 ounces, lying in a neonatal unit at St. George's Hospital. Louise was not discharged until the 23rd of November. She had entered the world fighting for her life before anyone even knew her name. The tragedy did not end with the birth. Louise had been born with esotropia, a condition where the eyes turn inward, directly linked to her premature arrival. Her first corrective surgery at 18 months failed entirely. She spent years of her childhood wearing thick glasses and navigating a condition that affected the way she saw everything around her. A second surgery at age 10 finally succeeded. Sophie spoke about it openly, telling the Sunday Express that premature babies can often have squints because the eyes are the last things in the development process to be fully finalized. She told the interviewer that Louise's eyesight is now perfect. But there is a chapter of this family's story that came even before Louise, one that is rarely discussed and never fully absorbed. In December of 2001, Sophie collapsed at Bagshot Park. She had suffered a ruptured ectopic pregnancy that nobody had known about because it had not been publicly announced. She was airlifted to King Edward VII Hospital and underwent 3 hours of emergency surgery, requiring 5 pints of blood. The pregnancy was lost. Prince Edward stood outside the hospital and told reporters that it was quite the most painful thing anyone can undergo. The couple went through 2 failed rounds of IVF before a third attempt succeeded, and that third attempt was Louise. Sophie went on to become a patron of Thames Valley Air Ambulance, the very service that saved her life, and began campaigning globally for people with visual impairments, inspired entirely by what Louise had endured. The grief and near devastation that surrounded Louise's arrival into the world shaped every single parenting decision that followed, and those decisions would later become the precise reason Queen Elizabeth chose her above everyone else in the family. But before the Queen ever fully recognized Louise, there was one other person who saw her clearly first. His name was Philip, and the bond they built together changed both of them in ways the public never fully understood until it was already gone. Prince Philip was not an easy man to love. He was blunt to the point of cruelty, he was impatient with sentimentality, and he had no time for people who performed emotion without meaning it. Most of his grandchildren experienced him from a respectful and somewhat cautious distance. Louise was different. She entered his world rather than waiting for him to enter hers, and what drew them together was something so specific and so physical that it almost defies the romantic narrative people tend to place around the bond. In September of 2021, Louise gave her very first television interview for the BBC documentary Philip, the Royal Family Remembers. She chose to speak almost entirely about the carriage driving because that is where the truth of what they shared actually lived. She said, in her own words, that the Duke of Edinburgh had been so involved in her driving, which had been lovely but slightly scary, because he invented the sport practically from nothing. She said it was incredible to have learned firsthand from him and that it had definitely made them closer. She then described him as, honestly, one of the most interesting people she had ever met. Those were the words of someone speaking about a man she genuinely knew, not a figure she had been told to revere. Philip died on the 9th of April 2021, aged 99, at Windsor Castle. COVID restrictions meant his funeral could be attended by only 30 people. Louise was one of them. She wore an equestrian brooch throughout the service, a horse's head and whip, as a quiet personal tribute to what they had shared away from any cameras. Philip himself had requested that there be no eulogies at his funeral, no speeches, no public declarations of love. He did not want ceremony. Louise honored that silence completely. After his death, Louise inherited Philip's 2 fell ponies, named Balmoral Nevis and Knotlaw Storm, along with his beloved dark green driving carriage. She was photographed driving his carriage across the Windsor estate and competed at the Royal Windsor Horse Show with those same ponies. The public who watched understood instinctively what they were seeing. This was not a performance of grief. This was a young woman carrying forward something real that could not be staged or choreographed. What nobody spoke about directly was how profoundly alone Louise must have felt after his death. Philip had been the person who had first seen her as something other than a royal grandchild to be observed from a distance. He had seen her as a student, a companion, someone worth teaching. When he died, the most formative non-parental relationship of her young life was gone. And 11 months later, the woman who had been watching all of this with quiet and unwavering attention would make a decision that would eventually reshape the entire inheritance conversation inside the palace. Queen Elizabeth had been paying attention to Louise for much longer than anyone realized, and what she had been watching told her everything she needed to know. Most members of the royal family visited Balmoral in summer with personal staff, carefully arranged agendas, and the clear understanding that they were fulfilling a duty by being there. Louise arrived with a book and a pair of walking boots. That difference, as quiet as it sounds, was everything to Queen Elizabeth. During the final summers of the Queen's life in 2019, 2020, and 2021, Louise spent unusually long stretches at Balmoral doing something that her cousins were not doing. She helped sort through private papers, the kind that were never destined for the official royal archives at Windsor. She sat with the Queen in private libraries. She walked the remote parts of the estate in long stretches of silence. Former royal staff described a dynamic unlike anything they observed with any other grandchild. One described Louise as simply present, not performing closeness, but actually living inside it. What Louise received during those summers was not a formal briefing or a structured handover. It was something closer to a private apprenticeship in understanding who Elizabeth truly was beneath the role she had performed without interruption for 7 decades. The Queen had spent her entire adult life showing the world exactly what she wanted it to see. Louise was being shown what lived behind that. When Louise turned 18 on the 8th of November 2021, she made a choice that announced everything about who she intended to be. She was legally entitled to the title, Her Royal Highness Princess Louise. She chose not to take it. Sophie had explained the family philosophy publicly several years earlier, telling the Sunday Times that she and Edward were raising their children with the understanding that they were very likely to have to work for a living. That philosophy was lived out practically when Louise, before beginning university, worked shifts at a local garden center, earning approximately £6.83 per hour. A shopper who recognized her told The Sun she could not believe it was Lady Louise and described her as really modest and sweet. Elizabeth watched all of this. She watched a young woman refuse a title that most people in that family would have competed fiercely to hold. She watched someone choose service over status at every single junction, and she recognized something she had been waiting a very long time to find in a younger member of the family. Louise did not need the crown to feel significant. That quality, rarer than almost anything else in royal life, was exactly what Elizabeth needed to find in the person she would eventually trust with her most private memories. But while Louise was quietly learning to carry something she did not yet know she was receiving, a very different kind of power was being assembled elsewhere in the family, and the woman assembling it had been waiting for her moment for more than 20 years. Understanding why Camilla's reaction to Louise's position in the family has reportedly been so charged requires understanding something that is easy to forget now that Camilla wears the crown. For more than 2 decades, she was the most publicly despised woman in Britain. She was photographed being physically jostled in the street by members of the public who blamed her entirely for the destruction of Charles and Diana's marriage. Polling in the early 2000s showed that a clear majority of British people did not want her anywhere near the throne. She endured all of it with a stillness and a patience that even her fiercest critics eventually had to acknowledge. That kind of survival does not come without developing a very precise understanding of where power actually lives inside an institution and how to move toward it without appearing to move at all. Her son, Tom Parker Bowles, faced his own defining public moment in 1999 when a News of the World undercover reporter caught him admitting to cocaine use. Charles reportedly called him a bloody fool and temporarily restricted his contact with William. It was a humiliating exposure for the family at one of its most delicate moments. Tom rebuilt his reputation methodically and completely over the following 2 decades, becoming a genuinely respected food writer and restaurant critic. His most recent book about royal recipes was described as an international success. His son Freddie served as a page of honor at the 2023 coronation. He attended his first royal Christmas at Sandringham in 2024. The rehabilitation was total, and it had taken 25 years. Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopes, has maintained a deliberately low profile throughout, working as an art curator and keeping her family almost entirely out of the public conversation. Her twin sons also served as pages of honor at the coronation. The Parker Bowles family, in its own way, had done exactly what Camilla had done. It had waited. In a move that attracted almost no public attention at the time, Camilla quietly transferred ownership of Ray Mill House, her private Wiltshire home that she had purchased in the mid-1990s for approximately £850,000, to her children, Tom and Laura. The transfer was confirmed through land registry records. Legal experts noted that this kind of arrangement is standard estate planning. It is also the kind of decision a family makes when it is thinking very carefully about what it will own and control in the future. Meanwhile, the signals William was sending could not have been clearer to anyone paying attention. Annabel Elliott was gone from the duchy payroll. A mutual friend told the Daily Beast that it was simply best to avoid mentioning Tom Parker Bowles around William. Christopher Anderson, who has authored multiple books on the royal family, told Fox News that Camilla has always been a little afraid of William and has been shrewd enough never to try to instruct him in any way. The relationship is described by nearly every serious royal analyst as one of cautious tolerance on William's side and careful, slightly fearful navigation on Camilla's. What Camilla understood better than almost anyone was that the real inheritance Elizabeth left behind had nothing to do with property or portfolios. It was moral authority. And that authority had been handed in the most private and undocumented way imaginable to someone who had been quietly sitting in libraries and walking across Scottish moorland in walking boots while everyone else was competing for position. The problem, from Camilla's perspective, was that by the time the significance of this became visible, the transfer was already complete and there was nothing left to contest. In September of 2022, Lady Louise Windsor enrolled at the University of St. Andrews to study English. She chose the same university where William and Kate had met, in the same ancient Scottish coastal town, and she arrived the same way any other student would. She packed her own bags. She worked a part-time job to support herself through term. And within her first few weeks, she was photographed sitting on the floor of a crowded train with her laptop balanced on her knees, looking indistinguishable from any other young woman heading back to university after a weekend away. The Mail Online published the photograph under the headline, "The Most Down-to-Earth Royal." It spread rapidly across social media because it had the specific quality of something that cannot be manufactured. It was simply true. 8 days after she began her degree, Queen Elizabeth died at Balmoral Castle on the 8th of September, 2022. Louise had barely settled into her new life when everything changed again. She traveled immediately to be with her family, and on the 17th of September, she stood vigil over her grandmother's coffin in Westminster Hall alongside her 7 cousins. It was the first time in recorded history that the grandchildren of a British monarch had performed such a vigil. She wore a horse pendant necklace throughout the days of public mourning, a piece of jewelry that connected every public moment of grief directly back to her private bond with both Philip and Elizabeth, the two people who had seen her most clearly before anyone else was paying attention. What Louise had actually received from Queen Elizabeth was not widely understood at the time and still is not fully understood now. It was not a building or a financial instrument. It was the knowledge of who Elizabeth actually was when the cameras were off and the ceremony was over, the private diaries, the handwritten correspondence with people Elizabeth trusted, the recordings made for grandchildren, the unguarded thoughts of a woman who had performed the role of monarch so completely and for so long that the human being beneath the performance had become almost invisible to everyone except the very few she chose to let inside. Louise had been let inside. She held the memory of that person, And memory, when it belongs to the most documented woman in modern history, is a form of power that no legal document can transfer and no rival can claim. What William does next will determine whether Louise steps further into that space or remains on its quiet edge, and his recent moves suggest the direction he has already chosen. Prince William told an Apple TV interviewer in October of 2025 that 2024 was the hardest year he had ever experienced. He spoke carefully but honestly about the weight of watching his wife navigate cancer treatment, about the pressure of a succession drawing closer than anyone wanted to acknowledge, and about his own determination to build something different. He said, with a clarity that surprised some observers, that change was on his agenda and that he embraced it. He said he did not fear it. William's vision, traced through his actions rather than his words, is leaner and far less tolerant of people who have attached themselves to the crown for reasons of personal advancement or legacy building. The removal of Annabel Elliot from the duchy payroll was not an isolated gesture. Richard Fitzwilliams, one of the most frequently consulted royal experts in British media, told GB News that signs were pointing toward Louise being persuadable toward carrying out some royal duties in the future. He told the Daily Mail that the possibility of Louise participating in royal engagements had been discussed seriously, and that King Charles's slimmed-down monarchy plan was no longer fully workable without additional family members being willing to carry some of the institutional weight. The angle that almost nobody is talking about openly is this. Louise's power inside the current royal conversation does not come from what she has inherited. It comes from what she has refused. She refused the HRH title at 18 when she was legally entitled to it. She refused to allow her grandmother's death to become a platform for her own elevation. She refused the performance of grief and replaced it with something quieter and more durable. She sat on the floor of a train and worked on her laptop. She drove an old man's ponies across a field in winter. She sorted through private papers in a library that nobody was photographing. Everything we have covered today points to one young woman who was underestimated at every turn and is still standing. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell us whether you believe Lady Louise Windsor is the quiet force the British monarchy has been quietly waiting for all along.